So when we put out our video explaining how the Russos fixed Iron Man, we outlined the idea that a character could be Russo'd. Russo'd is a term in the Oxford English Dictionary which refers to a character in the MCU which was struggling to be interesting being taken under the direction of Joe and Anthony Russo to become a great character. We of course made a passing mention about how Thor had been Russo'd in a similar manner to Cap and Iron Man, and indeed I think Avengers Infinity War gives us our most interesting iteration of the Asgardian to date. However, we got a lot of comments, telling us that Thor had not in fact been Russo'd, he had been Waititi'd. And to that I say,
is it too much to ask for both?
Seriously, I'm really surprised that it seemed to be one or the other for you guys, because to me, Thor was Waititi'd and then Russo'd, in one singular arc that starts in Ragnarok and continues directly into Infinity War. Whilst one is a comedy, the other a tragedy, they slot together perfectly through the exploration of unifying themes, and one clear objective: to take away everything that Thor holds dear, and then take away even more, to see just who Thor is when every part of his psyche is bruised and beaten down, and boy do they do it. This is how, rather expertly, Taika Waititi and the Russos destroyed Thor. Now of course, as with our Iron Man video, we can't forget the contributions of the writers for these movies: Eric Pearson, Craig Kyle and Christopher L. Yost for Ragnarok, and Stephen Marcus and Christopher McFeely for Infinity War respectively. They undoubtedly had a guiding hand in crafting this tale of Thor's deformation, and should be noted as being responsible for these storytelling achievements as much as Mr. Waititi and the Russos. We also can't forget the acting talents of one Mr. Chris Hemsworth, but I feel that everything from his comedic timing to his understated melancholic intonations will become clear as the video goes on. So just how did Taika Waititi Thor? Well, if there's one unifying thing that all of the characters display in Ragnarok, it's being humiliated, which makes perfect sense for Waititi's comedic sensibilities. Just about everyone in this movie embarrasses themselves or gets mugged right off.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
You're officially pardoned from life. I love women. Sometimes a little too much. Not in a creepy way.
You'll see!
But why is it so resonant with us as a viewer to see Thor go through this? Well, probably because pre-Ragnarok, Thor's kind of a spoilt brat. Think about it. He's a member of the royal family on his homeworld, he's lived for thousands of years with a stable nuclear family. Don't forget all the Loki stuff has only happened in the last few years, which, in the grand scheme of things, hasn't been all that long for either of them. Sure, he lost his mother and his daddy sent him off to Earth to learn a bit of humility, but really this could be the spacey equivalent of going off on a gap year, travelling to go and find yourself. I'm shocked Thor didn't come back 100% more spiritual, rocking some dreads in his hair, refusing to wash and wearing out his trust fund. Holy shit, is Thor that guy in Inbetweeners too?
Well, that's an interesting story.
All joking aside, Thor has always had his resources, his father, his luxuries to fall back on. He's a mighty warrior, sure, he's saved lives, yes, but at the end of the day, he still gets to go home to this. He's beloved, he's desired, there's a lot going on for the guy. So when Taika Waititi took the reins of his third solo outing, they wisely chose to retcon his character ever so slightly. He's a little less Shakespearean, a little more Drax the Destroyer, but there's a key difference between the two of them. Drax laughs and jokes whilst also living with the immeasurable pain of losing his wife and daughter, but that doesn't mean his happiness is fraudulent, it's how he's learnt to move on. Whereas Thor is all about facade. In John Yorke's seminal screenwriting how-to, Into the Woods, he talks about how character arcs revolve around the presence of facade covering up the realisation of a flaw that could make them whole. He says, fully realised characters have a facade. It's constructed of elements the character believes to be beneficial, but as we discover, will actually destroy them. It's the facade that triggers the problem. He shows it to the reader in a handy graph that looks like this. So, by the end of the story, facade and flaw will have traded places, and the principal character will have faced their fears. Thor's facade is his refusal to believe in no-win scenarios.
I'm not gonna lose.
What's that, mate?
Will.
No, I'm gonna win.
Will. I can't lose.
Huh. I guess it really is Thor. Anyway, he will remain jolly and keep his spirits up even in the face of Armageddon, or as it's so called in this movie, Ragnarok. Take the opening imagery of the movie, he's having a conversation with a skeleton, which is all that remains of the last person to waste away in that chamber. This is Thor's potential fate, staring right at him, and what does he do? He takes the piss. And then there's another important line in this scene when he confronts Surtur.
But it looks like I'm gonna have to choose option B, where I bust out of these chains, knock that tiara off your head, and stash it away in Asgard's vault.
You see that it's not just a refusal to believe in no-win scenarios, but the active belief in his own triumphs. He says all this without an ounce of doubt, and really, why should he? Because moments later, he does exactly what he says he's going to do, and we find him on Asgard having won another day. It's business as usual. His facade is so ingrained in his psyche that it springs to defend him in any instance, even when he's clearly bullshitting.
Did I win?
No, I won, easily.
Doesn't sound right.
Well, it's true.
She didn't dump me, you know. I dumped her. It's a mutual dumping.
I dumped her. Make sure you tell people that.
This idea that Thor is the master of his own destiny, that he can bend fate to his own will of course resurface later. His reluctance to believe in anything but a no-win scenario is ultimately why he is vulnerable to the failures he experiences.
It's not possible.
Yes, Thor, yes it is possible. Oh boy, is it possible. I think it's also neat that both Hela and Thor did their time as Odin's greatest champion, the golden child at the head of Asgardian royalty, and as a result, they both have a similar, kinda screwed up outlook. They both speak in a manner that makes their wants sound like a foregone conclusion.
Our destiny is to rule over all others, and I am here to restore that power.
Well, Hela, I guess you...
Sound like him.
Yeah. How did you know I was going to say that? If you look at Waititi's films, it's clear this kind of Thor suits his style to a T. You need look no further than something like 2010's Boy, in which Waititi plays Alamein, a hopeless father who's come back to find his secret stash of savings under the guise of coming to see his two sons. Everything about him is shrouded by a smokescreen of fakery, pretending to be a tough guy when really he can be more of a loser. Thor isn't a loser like Alamein, he's still saved lives and fought heroic battles, but the DNA of that facade is woven into his Ragnarok characterization. It also just reflects what Waititi finds funny. You can see this in interviews when he's having so much fun giving the interviewer this kind of faux Taika that takes everything to the most absurd degree.
I read that you said that somewhere something as much as 80% of it was improvised. Would you say it was that high, yeah, in the dialogue?
Well, I improvised that number. So
yeah.
Could be anything. Could be 20%.
Thor spends the entire movie treading this fine line of joking to hide his troubles, and blindly jumping headfirst into his problems to beat them from sheer bravado. Loki tells Thor it's impossible to beat the Hulk, and he tries anyway. And the reason he fails in the gladiatorial match is exactly why he wins in the final act. He learns to fight smarter, he learns that it's not just about strength and casting a little lightning. Sometimes people cheat, or factors beyond his control will affect the outcome no matter how strong he is. But does this mean he drops his facade? No, it doesn't. By the end of Ragnarok, he still holds the fundamental belief that he is the master of his own destiny. Why? Well, he starts the movie stating that Ragnarok will never happen, and then exactly what he swore against comes to pass. The reason why Thor doesn't learn from this is because he maintains agency the entire time.
This was never about stopping Ragnarok, this was about causing Ragnarok.
Despite it being the opposite of what he prophesied initially, he can still stake a claim to making sure events go as he pleases. We're in fact not at the end of York's diagram by the end of the movie, despite the fact that Thor has made progress in admitting his own misgivings. Because it is ultimately a comedy, we still get a happy ending. He might have lost his father, his most prized possession and his world, but he is now a king, he's made some new friends along the way, his relationship with Loki is stronger than ever, and he has an entire community of people safe and sound alongside him. So even though the movie takes us on a journey and beats Thor down to tremendous effect, it isn't quite enough to destroy him. Ragnarok is all about laying down the groundwork for that. It's safe to say Thor gets Waititi'd, of course he does, but that's not all that happens to our incredibly seductive Lord of Thunder.
Seductive God of Thunder.
Sorry, God of Thunder. To make him the utterly broken man we've been left with going into Avengers Annihilation. because he also got Russo'd as well, and boy does he get Russo'd. If you thought Thor had lost a lot in Ragnarok, the Russos waste no time making sure you haven't seen anything yet. We open on the same vessel we left the characters on, but it's now in ruins after a mighty battle with Thanos and his minions. We cut back to the bridge of the ship, mere moments after the post-credit scene in Ragnarok, to find dead people. Heimdall mortally wounded, Korg, Valkyrie and the others missing in action. Loki at the mercy of the children of Thanos, and Thor himself dragged along the floor like a plaything by the Mad Titan. Look at this. This is the definition of humiliation. Except it's not funny anymore. And then we're subjected to watching Thor get tortured, his best friend stabbed through the heart, and his brother asphyxiated brutally, before being left for dead himself. He doesn't even get a chance to speak really, beyond one very important line.
You're going to die for that.
If you want to put your hero on the back foot and give him an incredible drive to complete his quest, you can't go much worse than this opening scene. My god, do the Russos take all the excellent work Waititi did in Ragnarok and they run with it. I think this is also a good time to talk about how well these movies fit together, because they carry over theme rather than genre and tone. People like to complain about the Marvel movies' ever-shifting tone, but I think Thor's story in particular is proof that it works to masterful effect. You can go from something like this,
Get help! Help him!
to this,
Odin's son.
because of how well the themes fit together. We continue all the threads that made Thor's Ragnarok arc special. The exploration of loss, his ego, his belief system surrounding destiny and fate. And this was no doubt intentional, as screenwriter Stephen McFeely states, "We got to take Thor from the movie that came out just before this and use it to our advantage. The other movies are a tool for us." If you were to write down Thor's story across both movies, it would make sense as a complete journey. I think it's great that we can split it into two, and then have a really talented comedy director take the reins of one half, before seeing the Russos, who have excelled at darker fare, take the second. By Infinity War, it seems as though he might have dropped the facade as seen in York's diagram. He's focused and on a mission. Rather than Thor being the funny one, it's often characters around him creating comedy by reacting to him.
It's like a pirate had a baby with an angel.
He's got a jovial edge to him still, but it's clear for Thor that it's crunch time, it's do or die. He's lost too much to be the jokey, self-aware Thor from Ragnarok, and we might think that he's accepted his flaws, that he can't always win the day, and that he needs to fight smarter. He's become more emotionally intelligent, his cushy little life as a prince has been shattered. But all we're really being shown is just enough to make us think that he's changed. On the commentary track for the movie, Joe Russo says, "We were playing into predictive elements and turning them on their head. We are setting Thor up in a way on a correlating hero's journey with Thanos. Only one of them is going to win the movie. The expectation is that Thor will solve the problem." They pulled off the same trick in Civil War. Structurally, it seems like the super soldiers will be the endgame, and this problem will be the thing to bring Stark and Rogers together, but as we all know, hotter heads prevailed. Of course, it was ruined in Civil War by the trailers, but this time the Russos get the chance to pull off that trick and actually surprise the audience. Even though we have some inclination that Thanos is probably going to win, it's shocking to see Thor get so close, only for that to be flipped on its head again as we see him snap his fingers. They help to sell the final moment of the movie by giving us one of the most crowd-pleasing Thor moments ever. But also note the wording of the line,
Bring me Thanos!
It might be awesome, sure, but it also exemplifies the underlying problem with Thor's ego. What Infinity War reveals across the course of the movie is that Thor's facade is really still there, but it manifests in a much darker, more focused, more dangerous way. Rather than hiding behind humour, he doubles down on his power of belief.
You know, I'm 1,500 years old. I've killed twice as many enemies as that, and every one of them would have rather killed me, but none succeeded. I'm only alive because fate wants me alive.
This monologue is the most crucial part of Thor's entire story, perhaps over the entire MCU. It puts everything he's lost into perspective. We tally the losses from Ragnarok and Infinity War, as well as Frigga's death, but it also defines once and for all what we saw in the preceding adventure.
Thanos is just the latest in a long line of bastards, and he'll be the latest to feel my vengeance. Fate wills it so.
The idea that he has control of fate itself is his fundamental flaw. This isn't just mere bravado, this is his mantra. Thor is in a place where he's refusing to recognise how severe his situation is, and all the terrible things that have happened to him. This is the thinking that is keeping him from falling to pieces, yet it will be the thing that breaks him.
Well, if I'm wrong, then what more could I lose?
What more could you lose, Thor? What more could you lose? How about coming a hair's breadth to finishing off Thanos when everyone else has already failed, making you the very last hope, the last line of defence, and in your need to torment your tormentor, rather than finishing the job, you see before your very eyes the snap of his fingers, that wipes out not only half of the people close to you, but half of the people across the entire universe. In some small way, through Thor's own inaction, every one of those deaths is on him as much as it is on someone like Peter Quill. Thor has traded humour for this intense determination. He has fooled himself into thinking that he can't lose as a coping strategy. Even though he answers, "What more can I lose?" it's not something he actively thinks about. It's more of a, "Well, what more could go wrong?" sort of response. He's on a suicide mission in many ways. Death is the worst case scenario for him, never considering that the actual worst case scenario is what happens in the movie. From that first moment in the opening scene of Ragnarok to here, York's journey from facade to flaw has been crystallised in Thor Odin's son. It's only after his frankly pretty one-note plan to hit Thanos harder than he did the last time around doesn't work out that he is finally faced with the realisation of this, that one day he was always going to lose, that no matter how many people he has fought, the day will come when an enemy will be at the gates that will herald his own destruction, and rather than sitting there and assuming that fate will favour him because he tells it to, fate will punish him for his arrogance. Ragnarok maintains itself as a comedy, but Infinity War is Thor's tragedy. Where does he go from here? With Avengers Annihilation around the corner, and possibly Thor's final appearance in tow, we can look again to York for some sort of reasonable speculation. York states that the protagonist has to learn how to integrate the now dominant new self with the old one. It's not enough for them to assume an entirely new personality, they have to learn how to merge the good from the new with the good from the old. The facade flaw diagram isn't quite complete. There is one last chapter left to tell, where Thor will embrace his bravery, his determination without hubris, his will to rectify his mistakes without hiding behind them, and then his arc will be complete. Or should I say, if this happens, because as we have learnt from the God of Thunder himself, nothing is ever certain. Introducing Full Fat Chat! Chris and I have decided to open up a sister channel to Full Fat Videos. If you go to Full Fat Chat, you'll be able to find all the kind of things that we wouldn't usually put on our main channel, including debates, movie reactions, and responses to the ever-beloved comment section. If you go over there now, you can find our first set of videos, where you can see why I think Avatar 2 will make it big at the box office, and why Chris hates cassette tapes. What a bloody weirdo! Thank you for watching this week's episode of Full Fat Videos. Whether it be video essays, movie pitches, retrospectives, or our weekly Doctor Who discussion show, you can find it all here at our channel. So don't forget to subscribe and follow us on MySpace. I mean Twitter.